Hello, everybody. Good evening to those of you who are in Europe, and a good day to those of you who are elsewhere in the world. My name is Dariusz Stola, and I have the pleasure to chair today a panel discussion on the impact of philanthropy on Jewish studies in Poland. We have three eminent speakers. We plan to have four of them. Unfortunately, at the last moment, Anita Shapiro had to cancel her participation due to some unexpected emergency. But it means we'll have some more time for the discussion. Let me first introduce the speakers who are present here. Sally Berkowicz is the CEO of the Rothschild Foundation Hanadev Europe, supporting Jewish heritage and culture across the continent. She's trained social worker and worked in that field for over 10 years. Sally is now a freelance writer focusing on social issues and contemporary Jewish life. Her book, Under My Hat, shortlisted for the Jewish Quarterly Prize, reflects on raising daughters while straddling the tensions between orthodoxy and modernity as it impacts on women. I think I understand, and I have four children, boys only, but I had a quite intensive experience with them when they were young. Shayna Penn is the executive director of the Taube Philanthropies and also a member of the Polin Museum Council. Recently, she was awarded a Medal of Gratitude by the European Solidarity Center in Gdańsk, a museum of the Solidarity movement. I'm glad to stress it because I am a member of the academic collegium of this institution. The award was awarded to Shayna because of her groundbreaking research on the gender aspects of the Solidarity movement, namely the role of the women in the underground solidarity. In her book, Solidarity's Secret, Women Who Defeated Communism in Poland. Her other books include Gender Politics and Everyday Life in Central and Eastern Europe, co-edited with Gili Massino, and chapters in Beacon Book of Essays by Contemporary American Women Writers, edited by Wendy Martin, and the Routledge Handbook of Women in Central and Eastern Europe. Today, I hope Shayna will share with us her enormous experience with funding scholarship, education, and other activities on Jewish history in Poland and Central and Eastern Europe. Irene Kronhill-Pletka was born in Shanghai. Let me stress it because her life makes part of the story of the exilee Polish Jews scattered across the world. Her family was saved thanks to the visas of the famous Japanese consul Sugihara. Her parents could transit the Soviet Union on the way to Asia, and then her family moved to Melbourne, Australia in 1946. Irene has degrees in psychology and fine arts. She has been active in youth movements, cultural activities, and Jewish life, as well as business. She places particular emphasis on reviving, restoring, and maintaining secular Jewish culture and the Yiddish language. Today, she divides her time between Jerusalem, Melbourne, and New York. Since 2007, she has been directing a foundation dedicated to the memory of her parents, the Kronhill-Pletka Foundation, which is one of the great donors of the Polin Museum too. The foundation supports Jewish cultural and educational activities and social justice activities around the world. She is also the member of the board of directors of the YIVO Institute for Jewish Research, the Center for Jewish History, and the Joint, which helped her family and so many others during the darkest hours of the Second World War. Let me mention that thanks to her, the Polin Museum has this beautiful ceiling of the wooden synagogue, the highlight of our exhibition. So, as I said, the topic of this panel discussion is the impact of philanthropy on Jewish studies in Poland, and I would expand and mean the Poland and its historical borders, which now includes a number of countries. But I would like to start with a question to you to help the audience, and our audience are scholars from various countries of different age and specialization, to better understand the perspective of the donors, of the people who make decisions on assisting this project rather than another project. Could you please explain to them what are your priorities? What are you looking for when you meet with scholars who apply for grants or scholarship? You can give some examples of good or bad practices. And let us maybe start in the alphabetic order. That means with Sally Berkowitz. Sally, please, the floor is yours. And I propose that these first interventions, you will have some between 10 and 15 minutes, so then we can have the second round on responses and then plenty of time for the questions and answers. Sally, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you and good evening, everybody. I'm just going to make a few comments as somebody who works for a family foundation. As you know, grants are available from public bodies such as government departments, EU bodies or academic councils. And grants are available from private philanthropy. And there are pros and cons of each. And private foundations usually have someone you can be in contact with, unlike large impersonal government bodies. You can usually get some guidance. But on the other hand, private foundations can be very fickle. They're not accountable to anyone other than the family. So criteria can change, funding amounts can change, and the actual programs can disappear overnight if that's what the trustees of the foundation want to do. And I appreciate that that can be very tricky for people applying and frustrating. And as I assume my co-panelists will agree, if you know one foundation, you know one foundation. Everybody works differently, has unique criteria, and I'll be interested to hear what my colleagues have to say. So Darish asked me to be very practical. And so this is what happens when I receive an application. And as you know, many of you, I assume, have applied to the foundation. So this is what happens. The first thing I do is I look at the budget. And is the budget within the parameters allowed? You'd be surprised at how many people ask for more than what we've said is available. Those applications get rejected immediately. Because why should I look at something where we've given very clear criteria of what's available, and people ignore that? And that's related to the total budget. Have they asked us for everything, or are there other contributors to the amount? If I want to see if the items listed are reasonable, or do I feel that there's an inflated budget? If an application coming from Poland is asking for a salary that is the same salary as somebody in the UK would get, would I be very suspicious about that? So be very careful about your budgets. And I know that everybody listening is saying, I would never do that. I would never send in a late application. I would never ask for more than what's said is available. Well, let me assure you that many people have done that. It may not be anybody in the audience, but there are people that have done that. So that's the first thing. The second is I'm looking at the originality of the proposal. For researchers, have they identified a niche area worthy of further study? If they're building on a topic, have they demonstrated knowledge of the state of the field? Is there a core piece of work that they've missed, a piece of research that they're not up to date with? Well, that tells me something about their own research. I should explain that I don't personally make every single decision by any means. We have an a committee of academic experts drawn for the academic program. We have a range of programs that I can touch on later if people are interested. But for our academic program, we have a group of experts from Europe, Israel, and America who review the applications. So between them, I believe they're on top of the field. So we want to know that this proposal is original and adds value to the existing research. The third thing, is there a need? When we're looking at departments of Jewish studies to support, how many departments can a country support? Poland has an incredible number of Jewish studies departments relevant to the size of the population and the number of universities. How many? It's a question, and I think when we look at the future of Jewish studies in Europe, I think this is going to be later on this evening. I think that's going to be a question where we're going to have to ask ourselves, how many is it responsible to be supporting? Because are we raising too many expectations by supporting them and by giving a false sense of how long we can support a department for? And that relates to the issue of sustainability. How much is the university itself behind the department? We at the foundation actually have made the mistake sometimes of not ensuring that the university will pick up the costs after, say, 5 years of our funding. We've made too many assumptions, thinking that, well, of course, if we're paying, then eventually it'll become integrated into the university will pick up the costs. We were given assurances, yes, of course they will, but we didn't have anything in writing. And even if we did have something in writing, it didn't happen as well as we had hoped. And that's very difficult because it means even though we've said we will exit after 5 years, somehow departments don't believe us, and then it becomes a shock when we do that. And it's difficult for the staff who've been employed and are building their career in those departments. So I think that is a challenge. And we're trying to get a sense, what sort of community what sort of commitment does the university have? Or is it simply relying on Jewish money, which is perceived to be bottomless, that it will always be there? And this is not just Poland; it's right across Europe. The issue of the track record of the academics. Who are these people that we're supporting? Their reputation, their publications, their contribution to the field. Part of that's related to the originality of the proposal, and where we have, where we're looking at early careers or doctoral, postdoctorates. Who are the people that look like they've got potential? And some of it's a gamble. And I'll be interested to hear from colleagues. I'm sure we've all supported people that have gone on to brilliant careers and supported some people that have disappeared. And we have no idea where I can tell you from our experience, we gambled on them, but we've not heard, they're lost. And that's a shame, but that's probably partly in the nature of our investments as well. Another area is public engagement. And this is a difficult one. And I appreciate it's not one that academics themselves necessarily value, but it's something that we're interested in. Many academics just want to do their work, and I understand that. But certainly in the UK and in some other countries, there is a strong emphasis on demonstrating public engagement. Are lectures available to the wider public? How is the academic work relevant to the prevailing public discourse? And connected to this is public engagement with the local Jewish community, where there is one. Have the academics shown that they're interested in the Jewish community? What is the Jewish community able to learn from the academics? How and what can we as foundations do to perhaps promote some of that as well? And the last point I'll make for the moment is a word about referees. We always ask for referees, and I'm always ambivalent, I must admit, about asking for referees. They are important, but think carefully about who you submit, not your mother-in-law who thinks you're fabulous. And I kid you not, that has happened. But more seriously, obviously you want academics who support your work, but academics who are uncritical and are known to be sympathetic to basically any application that's submitted, it doesn't help your cause. It doesn't necessarily take away from your cause, but it's not giving us any new information. And I understand you don't want to give somebody who might be critical, but actually somebody who can be honestly critical and point out issues can be very helpful. So I just want to raise that, and I'll be interested to hear what colleagues say about referees, actually. So the more nuanced, the better in many ways. I think perhaps not quite 10 minutes, but I think I'll leave it there for now because I've sort of raised a few issues that I'm happy to come back to and sort of see how many of those chime with Irene and Shana, if it's the same sort of issues, and interested to see where they differ. So perhaps I'll hand it over to the next colleague.
Well, thank you very much. You can keep your remaining 5 minutes for the next story. And actually, you said that one foundation, but I have written down what you said about careful reading of the criteria, because now I can quote Anita Friedman, who is absent, but I remember meeting her years ago, and this is what he told me: read the criteria first. That's the beginning of everything. So, in the sense, this is what the foundations probably share. I cannot imagine a donor who, like someone who does not carefully read what has been written in the call for applications. Oh. May I give the floor now to Shana, please?
Sure. I just want to respond to that, Dariusz, and say a challenge there for people who are looking to apply to foundations. If you read the criteria, more and more Jewish foundations are saying the application to submit a proposal is by invitation only. And that provides a huge challenge and disadvantage for potential grantees. Maybe we can talk about that a little later. But thank you. I'm delighted to be here. And I also work for a family philanthropy. And Sally's general description at the beginning of her remarks of some of the attributes of a family foundation also applies to Toby. I want to talk more generally about Toby Foundation's initial early support of Jewish studies in the U.S. and how that has influenced our work, our commitment to Polish Jewish studies in Poland and elsewhere. So as with most objectives, the Toby Foundation's strategies and priorities for supporting Jewish studies, later Jewish studies, have changed over time as the scholarship evolves and as the societal and academic contexts change in their reception to Jewish studies, Polish Jewish studies, to Holocaust studies, and Israeli studies. Jewish studies was a relatively new field in North America when Tad Toby became interested in it. Several decades ago, it was still a new, exciting, and needed focus for academia and therefore for his philanthropy, which was at the time focused a lot on academia. Today, it's a needed focus for some other and rather worrisome reasons, including that the humanities in general are less attractive to North American students, which includes waning interest in Jewish studies. And that in turn leads donors who are more interested in funding Jews than academia redirect their grant making, which is something that Sally also touched upon, and maybe we can also talk about that more afterwards. Another reason donors have distanced themselves from Jewish studies is because Jewish studies has become politicized in myriad ways. We just need to look at Polish Holocaust studies to know that it's challenging to provide support to Jewish studies for various political reasons and not take positions in how exactly to do it. And I have a feeling we'll discuss that more in the second round. So let me frame this in the context of Tad Toby's grant making more generally, especially as concerns academia. Tad began his philanthropic giving by supporting academic and athletic programs at Stanford University, his alma mater. Starting 4 decades ago, he supported archives, collections, research fellows, and research projects. Though he's never been keen to support conferences and publications. And then in the late 80s, he set up a second foundation to focus almost exclusively on Jewish grant making. And it was soon after that he was approached by Stanford professors interested in establishing a Jewish studies undergraduate and graduate degree program at Stanford. It was the first time, actually, that he realized that the university's commitment to things Jewish, from scholarship to campus Jewish life, were wanting, to say the least. As academia is the primary activity of a university, the Toby Foundation aimed to help build a Jewish academic community on campus by endowing a new Jewish studies program. And so as a first step in his partnership with professors such as Stephen Zipperstein and Arnie Eisen, Tad helped finance bringing the personal library of the late Salo Bauron of Columbia University to Stanford, and he endowed the Toby Center for Jewish Studies, which has since become one of the strongest departments in the U.S. So impact, yes, is important. Another important thing is partnership, working with the scholars and the Jewish Studies programs to help further their missions with philanthropic support. So once Stanford was established, the foundation turned to supporting other Bay Area Jewish Studies departments. Most of them in the UC system, and none of them as significantly. We also fund the Center for Jewish Studies at the Graduate Theological Union in Berkeley, which is all an inter-religious studies environment. And for Islamic studies, there are many divinity schools on the campus, Mormon studies, Hindu studies, and Jewish studies. And one of the things that was done to help strengthen the uniqueness of Jewish studies though modest, at the GT, Graduate Theological Union, was to support in recent years an inter-religious chaplaincy training program. So our support goes to the Jewish chaplaincy training program to train not rabbis, but Jewish studies masters and PhDs, and if they're rabbis, also them in chaplaincy. So for the Toby Foundation, Jewish Studies is viewed as foundational to all other Jewish life programming that we do on campuses and in the Bay Area community. For example, the foundation gave major support to the Hillel Society at Stanford, which had operated in a small basement office for years. We endowed a building. The foundation has encouraged partnerships with the Bay Area community to bring intellectual content to informal adult education at Jewish community centers, museums, synagogues, in other words, wherever Jews gathered who were not on campus. In the early 2000s, Tad Toby learned there were emerging Jewish intellectual and cultural pursuits in Poland, from courses at Jagiellonian and at the Center for Jewish Culture in Kazimierz to the Jewish Historical Institute's archives in Warsaw. And we became particularly interested in JHIR, the Jewish Historical Institute, especially to support the Ringelblum archives. And we became interested in the Polin Museum project, which was long in development, and especially in the core exhibition and in seeding the Global Education Outreach Program, the GEOP, which is the host of this great international conference this week. So these programs became the mainstays of our Polish Jewish Studies support in Poland. They deal with archives, they deal with collections, they deal with developing an international network of Polish Jewish Studies scholars, and of research, and also support to graduate students. More recently, we contributed major support to Wrocław University's Toby Department of Jewish Studies to secure much needed physical space for its offices, libraries, and classrooms. And what led to that was that when we visited the campus and we visited the department and we saw the room, which was the so-called library, was just filled with boxes of books piled on one another, and it broke our hearts. And we realized that we had to do something to help them have a real usable library. And so we were very proud of doing that. We support a variety of Polish Jewish Studies projects in Poland, in the US, and in Israel and Europe. And some of them include the annual Polin Anthology, the American Association of Polish Jewish Studies, Holocaust studies, such as projects at the Center for Holocaust Research in Warsaw and at Jagiellonian. Of late, we've also been funding scholarships for Jewish Studies graduate students in Poland and in the Bay Area because they encourage students to want to be involved in Jewish studies. And that is a current tactic of ours, that part of the problem, especially for graduate students who have so many competitive interests and competitive institutions where they could study, is that if there is support if there is research and scholarship support for students to come to a Jewish Studies program, they may be more likely to do so. And we're finding that is very helpful, especially in the Bay Area, which, along with the tuitions being very high, the living standard is very high. It makes it very difficult. So I think perhaps I may stop there, and let me see if I want to just. No, I think I'd like to stop there. I think that is probably enough.
You're muted, Dariusz.
You're muted.
Thank you for reminding me. I just want to mention that when I visited the Toby Center of Jewish Studies in Wrocław at Wrocław University, I thought this is actually the best academic premises I have seen in Poland. It's a fantastic building in a historical area, just great. So all those people from San Francisco who pay this horrible rent, they can move to Wrocław and live comfortably studying at
I just want to say all three of our foundations support Wrocław and Polin.
Okay. So without much ado, now I give floor to Irene Pletka. Irene, please.
So it's a privilege and an honor to be here this evening. What Sally said, and what Shana also said, is that when you know one foundation, you know one foundation. Well, my model is I think you can take what they have said and just turn it on its head, because what I do is completely different. First of all, I'm a one-man band. I don't answer to anybody. I made the money, I give it away. Secondly, my interests are piqued by things that I think somebody else will not do, but that need to be done. So that was the experience with the Poland Museum. That has been my experience with many other projects. But also, I would like, although this is geared towards academics, I would like to broaden the definition for myself, at least, in what Jewish studies are. And so for me, the fact that individuals in small towns that used to have a Jewish majority are starting little museums and are interested in discovering the heritage that has been lost there. Those are things that I would support, because that speaks to me in a way that nobody else will do this, so I will step in. As the other two participants have said, I also support Wrocław. I give scholarships there. Why? Because nobody else is going to do that, and they really need it, and they make a difference. And the important thing for me, if I can give an example with the Poland Museum, I went to Poland at the behest of the Joint in 2008, and I met Barbara Kirschenblatt on the basis of food. We went to a food fair and we talked all day about Polish regional food. And at the end of the day, I said to her, "What are you doing here?" And she said, I'm the leader of a core design team for a new museum of the history of Polish Jews. And I picked my jaw up off the floor. And when she showed me this project, and she showed me this synagogue ceiling and bima, and she said, "Look, we have to build a building and we don't have the space." I said, "I'll give you the money." Not because I had budgeted in any way for this or had expected to do this, but because it spoke to me in a way that nothing else did. And I knew that if that didn't happen at that point in time, it was going to happen. And so my attitude towards many of these endeavors is that it's idiosyncratic. I have an executive director. She and I talk things through. We do our due diligence. But it's much more about, I think that we're more prepared to go out on a limb simply because we don't have to answer to a board of trustees. And so we're willing to take a chance on somebody who doesn't have the referees and doesn't have the background, but whose concept or whose pitch speaks to us in a way that resonates with what I think is the future of Jewish, not just Jewish studies, Jewish life in Eastern Europe. And so I will say, undisciplined. I am unlikely to, if you put a spreadsheet in front of me, I'm likely to go off to sleep. Looking at budgets, thank God I have an executive director who can look at those things, because I'm hopeless at that kind of thing. But it really does depend on that particular moment where something jumps out and speaks to me and says, "This needs to be done." And unfortunately, because these things are singular, it's not that I can actually put a definition onto it, or in fact say, this is the way that you should pitch. In fact, I'd rather not. I rather like that things come out of left field, and we can consider them and make a grant where somebody else will not. I think that there is a role for donors like myself, simply because foundations like the Rothschild and the Taube have these strictures that are required, and after all, they are very professional. I have a background as an artist, and I was a photographer, and I will tell you that what I used to do was I would set up the lens and I would run my eye around the perimeter of the image. And if that satisfied me, I would wait for magic to happen. I would not compose the whole thing entirely. And I think that my attitude towards funding in Jewish studies in Eastern Europe is similar in that regard, in that it is not preordained that we have a template that this will fit and we will fund it. On the contrary, I think it is that if there are certain parameters in place, we hope that magic will happen. I hope that's useful.
Well, thank you very much. That's been quite intriguing, I must say. But on the other hand, my social science part of my mind is blowing up, because all of you have been stressing the singularity of foundations and of projects. You've just said these things are singular. Good projects are singular. So I'm trying to find out any patterns that maybe that we can distinguish. But so maybe they will come up. And let's now move from this general introduction, which is to explain your perspectives, your priorities, to Poland and Central and Eastern Europe. Look back at the past decades. You've been in this field for quite some time. Would you could give us exemplary cases of impact of philanthropy on Jewish studies in Poland, but maybe Poland and Central and Eastern Europe too? What would you give us a beautiful example, seeding something which has grown, or projects that are most promising? They don't need to have a long record, but you believe to be most promising. What kind of examples from the past decades you can give to our audience? Sally, please.
Sure. I'll look forward to chatting more to Irene about her philosophy of giving, because I think there are some
by the way, you can respond to each other.
Sure. Let me add
on this panels. I'm just to moderate. So
right. Let me answer your question first, and when we have the discussions, I want to reply. So, just for context, about 25% of our funding goes towards academic Jewish studies, and we have an annual budget spending close to £6.5 million, between 6 to 6.5 million, just depending on the year. In Poland, I did pulled up a few numbers beforehand. We've given Poland alone, 1.4 million in grants just in academic Jewish studies in the last 8 to 10 years. And that will include a lot of individual support to students, doctoral, postdoctoral students, teaching networks, departments, a wide range of things. And across Europe, we spent significantly more. In terms of some of the highlights, one of the things that we've done is heavily invest in the European Association of Jewish Studies. I very much relate to Irene's comment about funding where nobody else will. And one of the things, we also have that approach in certain areas, and we've supported sort of the infrastructure of much of Jewish studies, of heritage work, so the European Association of Jewish Museums, the EAJS of Jewish Studies, and given them money for a staff member to sort of help support the infrastructure, but also to strengthen their conference programs. So people applying. So we've given a budget to the European Association to give them the status and the gravitas and the infrastructure to be able to award grants for conferences. And I think that's made a big impact on strengthening that association, which is, the voice piece for the field. We have created some stats of 23 teaching positions across Europe in Jewish studies. We've created those positions. The sustainability of those positions can be problematic. And I touched on that point before. We've created regional hubs of Jewish studies, one in Prague, one in, now I've gone blank, one in the UK, and one in Spain, where we've helped a university develop a network of activities around a particular department, but helping them to spread out as well and bring in students from a range of places around more centrally, to harness and leverage the capacities of a major studies centre to bring in other higher education places and heritage institutions that are around them. I think complementing our academic work has been our support for archives and our digital humanities programs. And that the archival work that we've done, a lot of obviously scholars rely on archival materials, but we've given another 25% or so of our funding goes to archival projects, and that has very much complemented the academic work. So building a sort of more comprehensive picture and giving academics the tools with which to do their research by investing in the archives as a complementary effect. We've also given, I've got here 30 language studies grants every year, enabling students to go and learn the Jewish languages. What I've noticed, the big differences between European and American students is European students have the languages, often they come with that, but they're very keen to learn other languages, to learn in the idea that you could do a PhD and just in English with no other languages, which I believe in many American institutions you can do, just doesn't pass muster in Europe. So we have supported people learning, Yiddish, Hebrew, Ladino, and feel that that's very important that they have the Jewish languages. So that's teaching networks. Pointing to success, what does success mean is very difficult, and it's long-term success, and how will we know that it's been successful? I don't know. I mean, Shana's point about the decline in the humanities, I was also going to mention that. I mean, I think that Jewish studies is such a minority subject within humanities, and the general antipathy towards the humanities Jewish studies is really going to struggle. And I think there are similar issues here about donors not wanting to fund. And you have the dynamic in the States, and correct me if I'm wrong, where Jewish studies is funded partly as a Jewish identity way of getting Jewish kids involved in their own Jewish identity, whereas Jewish studies in Europe, in most countries, the majority of students studying Jewish studies are not Jewish, which is a fascinating dynamic in itself, but makes some Jewish donors wary or less interested perhaps in funding Jewish studies, because it's not about Jewish identity in that case. So that's, I think, one of the differences between funding here and in the States. I think, that gives you a sample of things. So.
Thank you very much.
I can add to that. Sally, it's interesting because we don't fund Jewish studies to fund Jewish identity or to nurture Jewish identity. We think, and in the States, there are now more and more students who are not Jewish who are taking Jewish studies programs, and we think that's good. Mm-hmm. That's good for the Jews,
right?
And we're concerned that Jewish funders are distancing themselves from that trend. Right. When I see value there. We are not a bureaucratic foundation. We're a small foundation, and we're nimble. We're not, the founder is not an artist. We don't create magic, but he is an entrepreneur, and he believes in the entrepreneurial spirit. He's actually has he made his funds, his wealth in real estate. So he likes to make packages. He believes in leveraging with other donors, and he believes that the grantees that we support should leverage each other's resources and partner more together. Because look, increasingly, we don't know what's ahead in terms of how much philanthropy will go into Jewish studies. We have to start thinking now about how to network and collaborate more. We spend a lot of our time actually raising funds from other donors to join us in supporting Polish Jewish studies, Polish Jewish cultural institutions, academic Jewish studies in the Bay Area. We realized, and actually it was something that Ronald Lauder told us years ago when we began to work in Poland, which is, don't do it yourself, don't do it alone, even if you can afford to, because if you do it all alone, no one's going to join you, especially when you really want some support. And sorry, we think that's also very important for the organizations we work with. So we do ask different Jewish studies departments, especially between Poland and the U.S., to please create partnerships, and we've helped to foster some of those. So the programs I think that we feel most are our greatest successes in terms of their impact, in terms of their furthering academic Polish Jewish studies, and also bringing it into the mainstream, being able to take Jewish studies and take it to these wonderful projects in material heritage preservation, such as Natalia Romik works on, and the Forum for Dialogue for People doing informal education for kids based on Jewish studies. We think that there's great value. We also think that, at least for now, Jewish studies is still relatively new in Poland. There's still a lot of interest in it. There are still people, signing up for undergraduate programs and also graduate programs, much more so than in the US. It's a whole different, it's almost like what it was like in the 80s in the US. So I think there's a window right here that we need to continue to take advantage of. If anything, I would say right now, though, students and junior scholars are probably becoming nervous about the political walls they may be facing. And, we didn't get into the business of philanthropy to be activists, but we are often doing activism and advocacy. I think that's all.
Thank you very much. Irene, please.
Honestly, I'm not sure what I can add here except to echo what Shana said. But one of the things that I would like to, and I don't know if you intend to go into this a little later on, is that the pandemic has been, in a certain sense, an eye-opener in terms of Jewish studies. So, for example, at YIVO, where we would have in our winter program 35 students studying fairly esoteric subjects in Jewish studies, we now have more than 400 from around the world, because they can do it on Zoom. They can get up, somebody gets up in New Zealand at 4 a.m, but somebody gets up in Uganda, and they come from literally 100 different countries. And so I think that in this regard, the issue of the isolation that, in a sense, Shana was referring to originally, in that the institutions in Poland, in a sense, are newbies, that the ability to link all of these organizations and these teaching institutions around the world and offer students in other places access to stuff here that is really beyond their reach financially, has been, in a certain sense, a blessing. And I have been astounded by the increase in numbers of this type. The online engagement has been tremendous, but not just that, it's the sense that we feel that we are one people, that the people studying, and Jews and non-Jews studying Jewish subjects are linked around the world, and they are not isolated geographically in the way that they were pre-pandemic. I don't know that this is going to continue. I hope it does, but I think that it has opened a new window in terms of how we think about sustaining and supporting Jewish studies around the globe.
Well, thank you very much. You have just raised the topic I wanted to add at the third round of our discussion about the future. You have mentioned the pandemic. and you said that it was in a strange way, it was a blessing from a perspective. It reminds me the title of a great essay by Timothy Garton Ash, The Uses of Adversity, that sometimes adversity turns out to be beneficial or a kind of blessing. But we have heard two other important topics for the future. A key word is sustainability, which Sally has mentioned. How do you see the sustainability of the Jewish Studies Project, research, education, and education broadly understood, that has been funded by private philanthropy in the past years? How do you expect the future to be? Second was the kind of a general, maybe not crisis is too a strong word, but maybe not, of humanities, visible very well in the United States, I understand. It seems that, well, at least in Poland, we have other pressing problems. So we don't see this general crisis of humanities. I would say rather the opposite, with other problems which Shana has mentioned. That means the political problem that we face. We see the need of humanities, how necessary they are to cope with very pressing problems of today and also tomorrow. And the third one, we are going to talk about the post-pandemic, hopefully post-pandemic world. Almost 2 years of experience now, and the consequences that are going to be far-reaching. So if you could please comment a little bit about how do you see the future, and especially these three aspects, and now maybe we will reverse the order and start with Irene.
I always have
one more final question, comment to the audience. If you wish to ask a question, please write it in the chat. I will see the chat. I will read your questions to the panelists. So now it's time to ask your questions in the chat, please. Thank you. Irene.
So my father, who was born in 1907, was chided by his grandmother, who was born well into the earlier part of the 19th century, that because he went off to university and because he wasn't wearing a capote and because he had, in fact, abandoned religion, that Judaism was doomed and the Jewish people were going to die out. Now, my grandchildren are the fifth generation of non-believing secular Jews. So I've always been a cockeyed optimist when it comes to Judaism. Now, Jewish studies, well, the YIVO Institute was founded in 1925. I think they ran a deficit every single year until 2 years ago, and last year, under the pandemic, for some reason, we ended up in the black. And I think maybe it's because we have better methodology. I think we have all kinds of things. But what I think the point I'm trying to make is that despairing is not in our MO. I think we have a genius for survival. I think we have. I think there are sufficient of us. I think there will never be enough of us who care about these things. But I think that I think obviously one has to plan, but in a certain sense, in the same way that I talked about magic happening in an image. And also, religiously, if God won't provide, providence will provide. I think that if an idea is powerful enough, and I think these ideas are powerful enough, people will come forward and support them. Now, that may not speak well to a committee, but, as I said, I do have a different viewpoint, and I'd love to hear how the other panelists feel about that.
Thank you. Shana, please.
Well, I'm also optimistic, Irene, and because I think about the evolution of Polish Jewish studies internationally, especially from the 70s on, and all the great work that his scholars like Antony Polonsky and others put into developing relationships among scholars to help bridge some of the too Polish, too Jewish tensions that have been ongoing from the start of these kind of efforts to grow a Polish Jewish studies community. And we're in a tough spot right now. But we've been there before, though differently. And I think we will move through, this will be moved through as well. I know Scott Uri asked a question about is there something unique to Polish Jewish studies, to Poland than other countries doing Jewish studies. And probably Sally could answer that better than me. But I do think that having this long-term international relationship of scholars invested in Polish studies, Polish Jewish studies, and Polish Jewish relations is something I think is distinct to the Polish Jewish dialogue.
Thank you very much. Let me add to this point about relationships, because I have just made some research on this topic. And actually, the building of the relationship, building of trust, mutual trust, what the sociologists call social capital, across the ethnic and national borders, and that began in the 1980s. For me, it was the precondition for this great debates on Polish Jewish history that we have had in Poland. In particular, the great Jedwabne debate 20 years ago. So I think it was the building of trust among scholars, which later on contributed to certain civility, not everywhere. So that was going well beyond academia, if I can stress it. Sally, please. The floor is yours.
I'm not optimistic by nature. I'm afraid I'm pessimistic by definition in so many ways. So it's great to be balanced out. I wonder if Poland's the outlier in academic Jewish studies, and perhaps the black swan, that who would have imagined that this would emerge 50, 60, 70 years after the war. The private philanthropy, I don't know what we don't know what the future is. I see it in some ways a contraction around academic Jewish studies, and from our perspective, we're looking at, in a way, narrowing our focus and deepening it, because we had a much more scattergun approach at one point, and a little grant to Armenia, a grant to Greece, and could see sort of like casting your bread upon the water, sort of, if I can mix metaphors, whatever, and seeing what would emerge, and found that very little emerged that we could see actually. So are looking to more consolidate some of our funding. That's because we don't have a lot of partners, and the partners we have are on this phone call. So I'm not convinced that there are lots of other. I think there are philanthropies. American funders are not so keen on Europe. There have been many attempts to bring American funders to Europe. What they're interested in is innovation, innovative stuff, grassroots, funky, fun stuff that may or may not last. Same way we don't know if Jewish studies will last either, but there's a lot more focus on, young people stuff and Jewish engagement, and all of which is also important. And we also have a sort of whole community building area in the work that we do. But there's almost an anti-intellectualism amongst Jewish donors. In terms of other countries, so Germany, for example, a lot of it's state funded. We get very few requests from Germany. We get, and that seems to be quite a healthy, relatively healthy Jewish studies program there. Whereas in the Netherlands, it's under threat. There are very, we helped sort of secure a post there. The study of Hebrew, there are countries where Jewish studies is under threat, and there's only one or two places left where it's taught. So it's very hard to speak about European Jewish studies. It really has to be country by country. I think France, it's pretty good. And there may well be, I don't know who's listening. And I'm sure there are people who can comment if they're from specific countries. Even, in the UK, it's under threat. This idea, that's why I wonder if Poland's the outlier, because there aren't lots of students clamoring to do Jewish studies in the UK. They're going to the STEM subjects. They want to make a living. And there's the whole question about jobs in academia, who was going to people are, it's stuck. There's very few jobs available. One of the reasons we support museums, and we've had some training programs around Jewish heritage. Sorry, it's not a reason we support museums, but one of the amongst museum support we give are professional development and encouraging people who might have PhDs, if they can't go the academic route, to think about the Jewish heritage route, and providing opportunities to work in museums or in archives to use those academic skills and apply them in other Jewish contexts. So there's a limit to the jobs that are available, and there's going to be more of a crunch as well. So I'm actually not overly optimistic. But yeah, that's which I do. If I can just pick up on one issue that Irene, her introduction about, she's one woman, made the money, she can give it out as she wants, which is absolutely, that's great. But how do people find out about you? There's that serendipity, which is what's exciting about what you're doing, and it is the sort of the chance encounter, and then. How is that? And yet, we at the flip side, we have this sort of application process, which can seem bureaucratic and, rigorous and sort of boring in a way. And I'm not sure, I don't know that one is better than the other, or one is necessarily fairer than the other. And, is fairness a goal is a related question. Does everything have to be fair? But I am curious to know, to get your sense on that, Irene, about this nature of the notion of serendipity, and does that matter? So I know that's back to a previous topic, but I was curious about that.
If I may, well, the reality is it's a two-way street. Word of mouth gets out. I'm approached by, I have a business card with no telephone numbers and no email on it. I'm approached by a lot of people. Our foundation is, my executive director spends her days fielding email requests. I think, as I said, I think there is a place for somebody like me, and an important role for people like you and Shana. I think the fact that we in a sense, spread ourselves in different ways over this field is to the benefit of the endeavor in general, right? Because there's not one pattern that fits all. And so it may be that I am drawn to and sought out by the quirky that will not necessarily pass muster under your guidelines, but very often, in fact, we overlap because we end up supporting the same things a lot of the time, and so yeah, I don't know that I have a better answer than that.
Fine, thanks. It's interesting.
Thank you very much. Yes, Shana, please.
Barbara Kirschenbach-Gimblet had a question: how to make the case for Jewish studies to Jewish donors. And I wanted to address that. Yes, so I would say, one, go to new Jewish donors. We are now talking to people in Silicon Valley who have become philanthropic and who come out of academic studies at great universities, even though they're not in the Jewish space. But they're Jewish and they care, and we're finding some interest there. Also, and then I would say to have a bigger strategy, a strategy that includes, in the case of Europe, and Sally, I'd be happy to work on this with you, working with the Association of Polish Jewish Studies, the Association of European Jewish Studies, finding someone in the people in the EU government. And we have to remember that most university-based programs are supported by the national governments in Europe. And so we have to think of ways to work with the ministries of education and culture. We have to look for a bigger strategy that includes Jewish, government, corporate, and secular. And also to go to the larger foundations like Ford which was very involved in supporting the development of nonprofit sectors and academia after 1989. And I think we have to start knocking on doors again in a more strategic way and more collaboratively.
Somebody asked about the limits of philanthropy in the political climate, and I think sort of related a little bit. We had this issue with the CEU in Hungary that we support, and if there are people listening, and they've moved to Vienna, and we continue to support them. But I thought about this a lot. Do we write a letter of protest? Do we comment? And we avowedly don't comment. And whether that's right or wrong, listener viewers will have a sense and interested in what Shana and Irene think about that. But the Rothschilds are very reluctant to say anything, and we stick to the cause and don't want to be seen to be commenting on anything. Even Dariush, with Pauline, we might write a personal message to somebody who's in difficulty, but we don't take a stance as a foundation. And sometimes that can be, I respect that from our trustees. That's where, we are guided by our trustees on that. Whether that's gutless, I don't know. But if that limits if we take a position and then we're seen in a particular way, that could, in the long term, limit our capacity to intervene as well and to support, and our money, be regarded somewhat more suspiciously. So I'm conscious of that. I don't know what your view is on that.
So it is a sensitive topic, and we are careful, but we're also let me start by saying Tad Toby is honorary consul for the Republic of Poland in San Francisco, a position he's held for 15 years. So I started several presidents and foreign ministries ago, and I was appointed or approved as vice consul not long ago.
Well, congratulations!
And thank you. And we take it. We build. We're relationship builders, is how we look at it. Everyone knows the role we've played with Pauline Museum, and with supporting the renewal of Dariush's term, a second term for Dariush as the director of the museum, and we do a lot. We continue to speak with the different ministries and continue to have relationships there. Mm-hmm. And you will notice that we are very clear about our committee that selects the Irena Sendler Award every year. Does not take into consideration anything but the merit of the individuals. This past year it was Barbara Engel-King, and the year before Dariush, and so on and so forth. So we make our positions known, and we maintain our relationships, and that seems to work.
Interesting.
Let me follow the sentence of Sally. You said that you stick to your program, but this is the statement. You don't need to use words. The fact that you continue funding a program is a very clear statement, and I'm
agreed.
That's fine for me. Actually, this is the best thing you can do.
That's right.
Because there are many people who say words.
Yes.
So, and I think this I appreciate. Shana has read one of the questions from Barbara Kirschenblatt-Gimblet. Let me quote another one, the first one, which is, do you see any trends in the applications you receive?
Yeah, they want more. They want more and more money.
So this is inflation, kind of growing ambitions, but in terms of topics, regions, people.
I'm seeing a lot more requests for different forms of expression. So many more applications to make films and videos, many more than we had before.
Right.
Whereas before it would be to fund a book, a translation of a book, or a scholarly article. Now we really are getting a lot of requests for visual media.
we've also had that, actually, even though we've said we don't fund it. It's interesting. And we've been thinking about that. Because given the digital age, we get a lot more digital humanities projects, requests and in general to digitize materials. And that's another question, at what point is enough? Do you have to digitize everything? That's a whole other conversation. But we get a lot more requests for that. We get a lot more, well, actually with the pandemic, we had maybe 3 times as many doctoral and postdoctoral applications because I think people thought, well, if I can't work or furloughed, whatever, I'll do a doctorate. And so the quality actually was very mixed, much more than in previous years, because we had, triple the amount of applicants. Whether I don't think that'll continue. I think that was just a dip or a sort of a peak. Sorry, Shana, you were going to say something, I think.
No, I wasn't.
All right.
I thought you were responding to the question from Anthony Poloński, who asked, could you say something about the importance of publication projects?
I could do that.
Yes, please.
We support publication projects of institutions, but we rarely support individual authors working on a publication working on a text for a manuscript for publication. It's very hard for us to pull together a lot of individual smallish funds for individuals. There are just too many for us to do. But we will fund like the Ringelblum Archive publication program at GIR and the Paulina Anthology, as I mentioned.
Sally, because you don't fund video and this kind of content, what about traditional publications?
We have been doing less of that, but through their postdocs, people's manuscripts, their doctoral thesis into books as part of their package, they can be included, but we don't have an active publication program. We have thought about a translation program. We've thought of lots of different things, but over the years we've had them but phased them out. Our trustees have been ambivalent about some of them, so we've phased a few things out. Sort of what's the impact of what's the readership, what's the impact? We will see, like a lot of postdocs that have gone on to publish their book, we've perhaps contributed towards the research, but not the actual publication. It's a touchy point because I know a lot of people need that support to publish. And the thing is, the publishers want huge amounts of. Publishing is a difficult business. We also encourage an open access policy. So if you've had your publication accepted for an online publication, we will give money towards ensuring it's open access. And we've got that on the website because we're very much encouraging that open access policy. And we want people to publish in journals that are open access.
Irene, do you have any comment?
Again, because in a sense the volume of these requests that we get is so small, it's really on a case-by-case basis. I don't think we have a distinctive policy. I think it's, as I said, on a case-by-case basis. We paid for translations of things that we find singularly interesting or out of the mainstream that would not get out otherwise. But it's rare enough that I couldn't really say that we have a policy regarding it.
We have a question from Scott Uri. What about contributions to programs and activities in other countries in the region or in Europe? Is Poland a unique example of academic philanthropy? And if so, why? So is Poland unique? Who is going to answer?
Well, I think the simple answer is no.
Okay.
I suggested it was, suggesting it was an outlier, that it is unusual, but Shana, you're in the middle.
Yes and no.
Well said.
Very, very rabbinical answer.
Yes, I did think I addressed that earlier, Scott's question.
So what is unique and what is not? I got interesting. Why Poland may be unique and why it's not?
I wonder if it's unique because what appears to be this incredible fascination about Jews in Poland and the sort of plethora of university courses. I mean, I've got a list of I'm sure you have as well, a list of all the various departments that have Jewish studies. It's a huge number of them relative in Poland. There's this, I don't want to use the word obsession, but this sort of extraordinary fascination with Jewish life. And we understand, you're a bunch of academics, you understand why that is. And I wonder if that's more unusual than in some of the other countries. But, maybe not. But I wonder.
I think the person who might be able to address this the best is Antony Polonsky, right. Because as I had said earlier, this long relationship internationally between those who are doing Polish Jewish studies, and I wonder if because one of the largest centers for Polish Jewish studies is in the U.S. I wonder if that has anything to do with the large size of Jews who descend from Poland who are in the U.S.
Right.
And of the interest there. Also, Jewish studies developed in the 70s and 80s with a focus on Europe and Eastern Europe in particular. I was lucky to have Sam Kassow as my undergrad professor. And one thing that's interesting about our conversation today is we haven't touched upon Holocaust studies. And that's rather refreshing because, in this day and age, Jewish studies seems to be subsumed by Holocaust studies, and I'm glad it's not in this conversation.
It's really important that it's not. Well, I would say to you, one of the how can I put it, the blinkers that obscures the way we think about this is the fact that Poland's a very big country. And so, for example, at YIVA, we have developed and are developing a relationship with the Lithuanians where they seem to be walking a line towards something that we would find much more acceptable in terms of their understanding of what went on. And so I think the Baltics, Czechoslovakia. I think I was just in Italy and in Venice. It is. How can I put this? It's scattershot, but it's not uniquely Polish. I think there are little islands of interest and study and concern in many places in and around not just Poland.
Can I come back to a question you asked? What are some of the trends that you're seeing? One of the trends I'm not seeing, and perhaps others that you might want to see, we for a long time have been trying to generate more interest in the academic study of contemporary Jewish life. And we get very few applications, and the ones we get generally are not great. And because we've been wanting to encourage that. We set up the European Jewish Demography Unit based in London, but looking at demography right across, contemporary demography across Europe. And we have put out calls for, sociological studies of Jewish life and had very little uptake. And unlike, I think, the States, where there's lots of studies of contemporary Jewish life, we've had very little. And I'm curious to know if Irene, Shana, either of you have things you've wanted to see funded but not had much interest from the field.
I don't know, Shana.
I'd like to see more investment in Yiddish studies.
Uh-huh.
Well, I'll second that.
Yes, you will. Yeah.
That's my ballpark.
Yes.
but in general, I'm thinking that the study of contemporary life is not just an issue for Jewish studies. I think it may be for everything, and I think it is because so much of this stuff is politicized, and so it may be a minefield to start delving into what is going on in those areas. I don't know. I really don't have the experience to comment on this.
Well, in terms of studying contemporary Jewish life, there is an interesting project coming out of UC Santa Cruz Jewish Studies that Nathaniel Deutsch is leading. Nathaniel Deutsch, a biographer and historian of Einsky and his ethnographic project, and who's now doing a lot in digital humanities, is creating an ethnographic questionnaire and mapping of contemporary Jews based on Einsky's original questions.
Wow.
And this could be of great interest, well, to both of you, to all of us. Yeah.
Sounds fascinating.
And it's something we support.
So. That's fascinating.
Yeah.
But Barbara's asked about the limited number of countries where, other than USA and Poland. I mean, I could just speak. Barbara's asking where, for us, besides the UK and Europe. That's our remit. So Irene and I are both from Australia. We were discussing earlier on, from Melbourne, and we just don't. I'd love to do something in Australia. We just don't. That's not our remit. Yad Nadiv, which is the Rothschilds in Israel, fund a whole series of. I mean, we're independent from them. We share this. It's under the same Rothschild family, but we have independent boards, and it's a completely independent foundation. So we can only, each foundation is mandated by their board as to where they can operate.
Right. And Barbara, I would distinguish between Jewish studies and Polish Jewish studies also, because we fund Jewish studies in the United States, not solely Polish Jewish studies. The United States is a big country, so it might sound like it's only the US, Poland, and Israel, and occasionally in Australia, occasionally in London, in England, because we do fund graduate student scholarships at Oxford Center for Hebrew and Jewish Studies, and in other parts of the U.S. and in Israel, though Israel not as significantly as we in Jewish studies as we give to Poland or in the U.S.
Right.
In the last comment by Irene, there was this question of the challenging political environment, and we have a question about it, quite specific. Perhaps you could tell about the limits of philanthropy within current political climates in Poland and elsewhere, and I'm stressing elsewhere, because we have a number of countries with similar problems, and how your institutions have adjusted the philanthropic strategies in the past few years. Have you adjusted? Do you have a reply to these topics, or you believe they are just temporary and the best way is to pass through difficult period? Could you reply if you wish?
Well, if I may, I think as in other stressful periods in history, the question is, do you have passionate partners on the ground? They don't have to be members of, they're obviously not going to be members of the government. Are they organized? Are they vocal? Are they capable of delivering to you? Are you able to alter the narrative by supporting them? And that, I think, goes for any place where there are political and other difficulties. So I'm not going to mention countries, but we for example had planned to visit a country in Eastern Europe where the State Department isn't going to let us go there, and so that's sort of a no-no. And we will try and engage with the individuals who are obviously bitterly disappointed that we're not going to make the connection. And difficult to, if you're not there physically to assess what's going on, it's difficult to really get a handle on what the situation is. And so a lot of this is flying blind. I'll be perfectly honest about it. And so I think you picks your target and you takes your best shot, and it'll fall where it falls. Hopefully it'll fall well, but it may not. And I think there's an element, a large element of risk in these things.
Mm-hmm. Shana, please.
I would like to say to all of the people in the audience that I would like to invite your suggestions to us. What you would like, how you would like to see foundations handle this, the political matters, and also how you would like, how you see what roles foundations can provide in other kinds of support for Jewish studies and Polish Jewish studies. Love to hear from you.
Well, thank you very much. I hope that some of the people in the audience will respond. I see that Anthony has replied to the question of why Poland, and he wrote that for Poles, Jews are the significant other. For Lithuanians, it's Poles. For the Ukrainians, it's Russians, and for the Czechs, the Germans. So it seems that Poland is unique, but Anthony moved me to a very specific question, which is also about the political conditions, namely, where is Belarus? If we speak about Polish Jewish studies historically, it includes Belarus. So
that's right.
What to do? You know, it's a black hole. Shana, could you please, because I see you would like to comment, if you wish.
I think
this is the most difficult.
I know. Well, I actually think of Belarus, studying Western Belarus as being part of Polish Jewish studies. Mm-hmm. And I think it has been, and it's also not been. But I think that's probably the case with Lithuania, also in Ukraine, Galicia.
Sally, have you had any activity in Belarus?
No, not really. I haven't anything to add.
So it seems this is a black hole, right in the middle of
we've had
Eastern Europe.
We have not been approached, but we have supported projects that do scholarship research in those countries, mm-hmm. as part of Poland.
And finally, we have also a question, one more question from Barbara Kishner-Gimblet, about the difference between funding individuals and funding programs and projects.
I mean, I'm not funding individuals. Everything's a gamble, but perhaps funding individuals is more of a gamble, but perhaps more exciting. You never know. I mean, there's a couple of people that we've, over the years, they applied for a doctorate, then they applied for a postdoc. Now they're teaching, and so it's been an incredible investment, and it's been terrific. And you can see how they've blossomed and making a terrific contribution. And then there are individuals who fall off the radar, but that's the gamble. Departments, you like to think that there's perhaps a bit more consolidation, a bit more rigor. I'm not quite sure what you mean, what the difference is. I mean, they're just the nature is different. You're looking at it differently. The outcome is going to be different. The purpose is different. It's just a matter of what your focus is as a foundation or as an individual donor. They both make an impact, but it just in different ways. And yeah.
We also like to fund institutions that will fund individuals, not just programs and projects, but that are, like GEOP has the research fellowship program. It has the graduate seminars. These are for the enrichment of individuals. For us, it makes more sense because there's a direct relationship within the content, the environment that the individual is working.
I think also that directing funding towards individuals through an institution gives you an extra layer of protection when you're doing your due diligence, because it behooves the university to at least take an interest in what you are sending through their coffers to a scholar. And I think that that's not a bad way to go about it.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Okay, so let me, because we have just a few minutes left, let me ask my last question, which is, if you had a goldfish and you could make a wish for the philanthropy for Jewish studies, what it would be? The best thing that could happen to the philanthropy in Jewish studies?
Who wants to take that one?
Well, I think something that we've all alluded to is that Jewish foundations have been distancing themselves from, or saying is that they've been distancing themselves from Jewish studies, and also that national Jewish education program foundations in the U.S. don't fund academia. And I'd like to see a paradigm shift there. I'd like to see these foundations and donors understand why Jewish studies is so foundational to any interest they have in Jewish identity formation, Jewish community development, and Jewish education for the grades preschool through high school.
I think if I had a wish, it would be that we could educate Jewish family foundations across the board, Jewish donors, educate them in the direct link between Jewish continuity, which is something that they care about, and Jewish studies, which is the way that they will get there. And I don't think that link actually exists too strongly. At the moment, I would really like to strengthen that.
Thank you. Sally?
No, I'm not sure I agree with Irene's assumption, so which is a whole other discussion. So I don't make wishes.
I know, you're the best. That's great. That's great.
Shana and I are the Pollyannas, and you're
not. No, I'm no Pollyanna, I can tell you that.
I don't think anyone's ever described me as a Pollyanna, but I think the academics would take issue with the notion of Jewish continuity, and so we might look for a different term than continuity.
Looks like a beginning for an excellent next debate.
Okay.
One day, but for the time being, thank you very much for your
time.
Thank you, Dariusz.
For everything you have said. I hope that at least some people in the audience will respond to call from Shana to give some proposals. I think that's really, as a scholar, I believe in a fruitful cooperation. And I also know that the best thing to do is to clash ideas and see what happens.
Right.
And actually, I love what Irene has just said. There is a deep connection between knowledge and existence. Mm-hmm. And the better we understand the world, the better we can react to the changing conditions, not just by continuing what we have been doing in the past, but doing it in a different way. But that's my personal comment to this beautiful sentence which you have just said. So thank you all three.
Baruch Hashem. Thank you, Dariusz.
Thank you, Dariusz.
Thank you, Dariusz. Thank you, everyone, for attending.
Thanks.
Bye.